into the episode, starting with number 10. Here we have Khadija bint Khuwailid. Khadija was the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who she met as a widow of a very wealthy merchant. She had actually hired Muhammad before he was considered a prophet, but soon after she came to see him as a potential husband. And according to most sources, she was about 40 years old and the Prophet Muhammad was 25 years old when they got married. The Prophet Muhammad and Khadija, they had 6 children together, including 2 sons who ended up passing away as infants. While she was alive, Prophet Muhammad did not marry any other women. From there, let's move on to number 9, where we have Sauda bint Zam'a. After 25 years of marriage, Khadija had passed away, so the Prophet Muhammad was left to raise a family, and he found that he couldn't really devote as much time to promoting Islam as he really wanted to, so he ended up deciding to marry again, and he chose to marry a widow by the name of Sauda bint Zam'a. And the Prophet Muhammad, he looked for the approval for their marriage from her parents, and then they told him to just ask her and see if she'll accept. So of course she accepted, and they were married for 3 years before the Prophet Muhammad took another wife. Moving on now to Aisha bint Abu Bakr. Aisha was a daughter of Abu Bakr, who was one of the Prophet Muhammad's closest friends. She was married to him at a very young age, and Aisha was raised a Muslim, and after the marriage she and the Prophet Muhammad became extremely close, and Muslims believe that Aisha narrated more than 2,000 hadith, which are the record of the words and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. And Aisha was actually one of the only 3 of the Prophet Muhammad's wives who actually memorized the Quran in entirety. As years went on, Aisha was widowed at the age of around 18 or 19 years old, but she went on to teach as well as play a very significant role in the spreading of Islam for over 40 years. Number 7 brings us facts about Hafsa bint Umar ibn al-Khattab, and she was Prophet Muhammad's 4th wife, and she was also the daughter of one of the Prophet Muhammad's closest companions named Umar ibn al-Khattab. Now their marriage was more so for a political alliance, and Hafsa had been married at a young age as well. As a matter of fact, Hafsa and Aisha were the youngest of the Prophet Muhammad's wives, and both had pretty similar personalities, and it was said that they were very strong young women, and they also apparently they got along really well. The next fact involves Zainab bint Khuzaimah, and she was the first of the Prophet Muhammad's wives that did not come from the tribe of Quraysh, which the Prophet Muhammad was also from. She ended up passing away less than a year after their marriage, so because of that, there's very little known about her. But before this marriage, she earned the title of the mother of the poor due to her generosity that she showed to poor people. Okay, so for number 5, here we have Salama bint Abu Umayyah. Salama, she married the Prophet Muhammad at the age of 29 years old, and this was after her first husband had passed away. She and her husband were some of the first to leave Mecca to Medina when she was forced to separate from her husband, and also her son was abducted. And at the passing of her husband, she ended up marrying the Prophet Muhammad, and Salama, she narrated more than 300 hadiths, and there was a lot of them that related to women. Now let's look at Juwayriya bint al-Harith. Juwayriya, she came to the Prophet Muhammad's attention when she was actually captured in the battle against the tribe of Banu Mustalik. She was 20 years old at the time and the daughter of the chief Banu Mustalik, and her marriage created an alignment between her tribe as well as the Muslims. And when the Prophet Muhammad married Juwayriya, it allowed the tribe to enter Islam with honor by removing all of the humiliation of their defeat. Soon as they announced publicly that they were married, all the wars stopped, as well as all the captives of war, they were set free. And in total, Juwayriya was married to the Prophet Muhammad for 6 years. Number 3 brings us Zainab bint Jahsh. She was married first to one of the Prophet Muhammad's freed slaves, but their marriage was short-lived and it was very problematic, a whole lot of turmoil happening. So the Prophet Muhammad actually allowed them to get a divorce. Now, of course, divorce was never the ideal situation. It's very frowned upon. And also, because of divorce, it usually left the women in a more difficult situation than the man. So to satisfy everyone involved, including Zainab's family, the Prophet Muhammad ended up marrying her. And Zainab began to be very popular and known for her works of charity. For number 2, let's look at Habiba bint Abu Sufyan. Habiba is also known as Ramallah, and she was a daughter of Abu Sufyan, who was a leader of the Quraysh tribe and as well as an enemy of Islam at that time. But she stated her beliefs in Islam despite the consequences that she would face. Now, her husband had passed away after the migration to Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia, and she was all alone in a foreign country with her young daughter. So of course she was in a very difficult situation. Now, when the Prophet Muhammad heard of this, he offered to marry her and she accepted. And the final fact in this episode has to deal with Safiya bin Huyay ibn Akhtab. Safiya was born in Medina to the chief of the Jewish tribe Banu Nadir, and in the year 629 CE, the Muslims won the Battle of Khaybar and Safiya was taken as a slave. Now, the Prophet Muhammad did suggest that Safiya should convert to Islam, and after she did, they got married. Now, despite her conversion though, Muhammad's other wives, they used to tease Safiya from coming from Jewish lineage, but the Prophet Muhammad, he once said this, and I quote, "If they discriminate you again, tell them that your husband is Muhammad. Your father was Prophet Aaron and your uncle was Prophet Musa." So what is there in that to be scornful about? Safiya was 21 years old when the Prophet Muhammad passed away, and she lived for another 39 years after that. Starting at number 10, we have Nusayba bint Ka'ab. Now, this woman is a real hero and she's a tremendous fighter. She was also known as Amara, and she was part of the Battle of Uhud, where she participated by giving water to people who are thirsty and injured. And Prophet Muhammad, in that battle, he actually lost his teeth, and most of the companions either got martyred or they fled the war. Now, when Amara, she saw his face bleeding, she dropped her containers of water and she literally took up a sword of one of the escaping fighters, as well as a bow and arrow from another fighter, and she did this to defend the Prophet. She also participated in the Battle of Yamama, where she lost her hand during the battle. So she was front line. The next female companion we're going to be looking at is Asma bint Umayyas. Now, she was one of the earliest converts to Islam, and she was married to Ja'far bin Abu Talib. Now, when he was martyred in the Battle of Mu'tah, she married Abu Bakr. After he passed away, she remarried again to Abdur Rahman bin Auf. And then when he passed away, she ended up marrying Ali bin Abu Talib. So a lot of tragedy and a lot of remarrying in her life. Now, when the Prophet Muhammad was going to perform the Hajj pilgrimage, Asma was in her final trimester of pregnancy, but she was so eager to perform Hajj as well that she wasn't even worried that she was so heavily pregnant. She was determined to do it. At number 8, we have Hakim bin Harith. Now, she was a woman who was the wife of Ikramah, son of Abu Jahl, and she accepted Islam on the day of the conquest of Mecca. She also led her resistant husband to convert to Islam as well, and this took many attempts. And since he actually had run away when the Muslims gained victory, and she went to find him literally in the middle of nowhere. Then her husband was unfortunately martyred, and then she remarried. Eventually, her second husband got martyred as well, and during that battle, she tightened her clothes and pulled out some poles of the tent, and she went out and slayed 7 armed enemy men. So yeah, literally 1 woman versus 7 men, and they didn't stand a chance against her. Number 7 brings us to Sulaym bint Malhan. She was the mother of a famous companion, Anas bin Malik, and she converted to Islam before her whole family did, and her husband ended up divorcing her because she converted. Now, when Anas bin Malik turned 10 years old, Sulaym took him to the Prophet Muhammad and offered him to his services. So Prophet Muhammad took him in and he stayed with him for about 10 years. And that's one of the reasons why there's so many hadith narrated by Anas. Number 6 brings us Kansa. Her full name was Tamadur bint Amr, and she's usually referred to as Kansa though. But she was a very eloquent woman and she was a poet. She was so great that even famous Arab poets used to call her the best of all the poets among humans and jinns. She used to cry a lot, and she cried so much that her eyes began to form dark circles around them. but her deep emotions would bring everyone else around her to cry with her. And her ability to express her emotions like this, it really carried through into her poetry. After becoming a Muslim, she was known as Khansa when the Prophet Muhammad saw her and said, Ya Khansa. Halfway in at number 5, let's look at Fatima bint Muhammad. Of course, she is the 5th child of the Prophet Muhammad and Khadija. She was born at a time when her father had begun to spend a lot of time in solitude in the mountains around Mecca, just to pray and meditate, things like that. And when she was 5 years old, she heard that her father had become the messenger of God. And his first task was to convey the news of Islam to his family and close relations. They were to worship God and only God. Now, her mother, who was a real pillar of strength and support, she spoke to Fatima at such a young age that her father was going to be doing this. And from that time, that's when she became a lot more attached and really felt a deep love for her father, Muhammad. Fatima also accompanied the Prophet when he made Umrah in the 6th year after the Hijrah, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And then in the following year, she and her sister Kulthum, they were among the mighty group of Muslims, as well as Muhammad was there during the liberation of Mecca. Number 4 brings us Salama. Now, Salama was the wife of Prophet Muhammad also, and she was known for her beauty, her wisdom, as well as her knowledge. And get this, she also narrated 378 hadith. She used to take good care of her facial beauty, yet she was someone who was also very modest in her dressing, and she wanted other women to be modest too. It was narrated from Salama that she mentioned women's hems to the Prophet Muhammad, and he said, "Let it down a handspan." Salama said, "But that will uncover her feet." He said, "Let it down a forearm's length, but no more than that." Next up at number 3, we have Juwayriya bint Harith. Now, this woman, she was a Jewish royal. In one hadith, Aisha describes her saying this, and I quote, "She was a pleasant woman. No one saw her except he became captivated by her." But it was the beauty of her religion as she lived it out that really made her attractive. Because Aisha also said this about her: "I knew of no other woman who brought greater blessing to her people than Juwayriya." Also, her entire tribe became Muslim after she accepted Islam. Number 2 brings us Hind bin Utbah. This woman, like whatever she did it with all her heart, whether it was good or bad. And she had a lot of anger towards Muslims. She was so intense that she accompanied the army to the Battle of Uhud and wanted to disfigure Muslim bodies. Eventually, though, she converted to Islam, and because of her attitude that she previously had towards Muslims, she had a lot of remorse, and she kept doubting as to whether or not she could actually face Muhammad. And she ended up veiling her face completely so that when Prophet Muhammad saw her, he wouldn't really recognize who she was. And that's how she took her Shahada and officially became Muslim. Now, we end this episode off at number 1. We have Barira. She was an Arab slave girl, and she was forced to marry another slave who was named Mughith. And he was somebody that she did not like at all. But as a slave back then, she didn't have much choice, so she had to get married to him, and she ended up having children with him. Now, Aisha, she said this: "Barira came to me and said, 'I have agreed with my masters to pay them.' And Aisha helped her get free by paying her masters a certain price, and then she was completely set free. And then when Barira was a free woman, she was given the choice to keep her marriage with her slave husband or to leave him, and she ended up choosing to leave him. Then after she left her husband, she went on to become a great scholar, and she taught Islam till the day she passed away. So with that said, moving on to the woman at number 10, we have Khadija bint Khuwaylid. She was known by the title of Mother of the Believers, and Khadija was in her 40s and the Prophet Muhammad was 25 years old when they got married. So the Prophet Muhammad described his first wife as follows: "She believed in me when no one else did. She accepted Islam when people rejected me, and she helped and she comforted me when there was no one else to lend me a helping hand." And only after her passing did the Prophet Muhammad marry again. Khadija was the mother of 2 of Muhammad's sons who passed away young, as well as all 4 of his daughters. Moving on to the woman at number 9, we have Aisha bint Abu Bakr. She was known for her spirit as well as good memory, and she became a teacher and a narrator of the Hadith, which are the traditions and pronouncements of the Prophet Muhammad. Aisha was the daughter of Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's close friend and companion, and she married Prophet Muhammad at a very young age. As a matter of fact, she was 9 years old when they got married, and she's the only one of his 13 wives who never had a husband before. At number 8, we have Fatima. Now, Fatima was Prophet Muhammad's youngest daughter, and she was deeply devoted to him and spent her spare time praying and worshiping. Fatima was also his favorite and closest daughter. She passed away 6 months after he did. She was the mother of Prophet Muhammad's grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. She's considered as a role model for Muslims, and Fatima is one of the most beloved names for Muslim girls. The woman at number 7 is Sauda bint Zam'a. Sauda was a widow and may have been as old as 55 years old when she married Muhammad. Now, there was some debate over whether or not she or Aisha was Muhammad's second wife, but the marriage seems to have been an act of graciousness that was really aimed at rescuing Sauda from a very difficult life that she had. According to many accounts, the marriage was friendly rather than a romantic marriage. Moving on now to number 6, we have Zainab bint Jahsh. She was Prophet Muhammad's cousin as well as wife, and she was described as a small and beautiful woman, but she had a very quick temper that quickly was dissipated as well. So she would get angry, but then she would release the anger really quickly. She was known for that. She was a very talented leather worker as well, and Zainab married Prophet Muhammad after her first husband's passing in the year 622. At number 5, we have Hafsa bint Umar. Hafsa was a woman who was not afraid to say what was on her mind. Unlike many of Prophet Muhammad's wives, she was previously married. Hafsa was a woman who was known to assist those who were wounded on the battlefield when her previous husband passed away. The woman at number 4 in the Prophet Muhammad's life is Hind bint Abi Umayyah. She was also known as Salama. She and her first husband were early converts to the religion of Islam, and she also had moved to both Abyssinia and Medina. And when she had married the Prophet Muhammad, she was a single mother of 4 young orphans. Moving on now to the woman at number 3, we have Habiba. She was also known as Ramla bint Abi Sufyan, and she, along with her first husband, were early converts to the religion of Islam as well. Now, there was a time when her husband had reverted to Christianity, but at that time, Ramla divorced him, and then she later married the Prophet Muhammad, although they didn't initially live together. Next up at number 2, the woman we have here is Safiya bint Huyay. She was the daughter of a Jewish chieftain, and Safiya was taken captive when her husband was killed in battle by the Muslims in the year 621. And shortly after that, she converted to Islam and she married the Prophet Muhammad. And finally, at number 1, we have Zainab bint Muhammad, and she was the Prophet Muhammad's eldest daughter, and she was born in the 5th year of his first marriage when he was 30 years old. And then she converted to Islam immediately after the Prophet Muhammad declared himself to be the final prophet. Now, it's believed that she passed away during a pregnancy that ended up being a miscarriage.